Hey, my name's Jonathan, and I'm a veteran.
Hi, my name is Daryl, and I'm a veteran.
My name is Chad, and I'm a veteran.
Hey, I'm Travis. I'm an Air Force veteran.
Hi, my name's Ashley, and I'm a veteran.
Well, hello, everybody, and happy Sunday. I'm Carolee, the hostess of Conversations with a Vet. I want to thank everybody for joining me today. I have a wonderful guest and a great conversation coming up. And his name is James Blackwell. He was a major in the U.S. Army. He's retired. He's also used to be a CNN military affairs analyst, and he has written a book regarding the Persian Gulf War, the strategy and tactics of the Persian Gulf War. He also is part of the 307th bombardment group, and he is in the process of working on a book pertaining to the Korean War, if I recall that correctly. Nod. I see him back there. Yes, no, yes. Okay, he's nodding. I got that right. And in addition to that, he's here to talk about his time. He was in the military during the Cold War, but we want to get his take on what the military was like, etc. So really excited to have him come on and join us today. It's an absolute honor and a pleasure. Jova Q, Jason, welcome both to you for joining. Appreciate you. So I know that James has a lot to talk about. So before we get there, though, I just want to say when we hit, again, that 500 mark for subscribers, we are going to be doing some giveaways. And we have several books that are going to be given away. And that includes James Blackwell's book, Thunder in the Desert, the Strategy and Tactics of the Persian Gulf War. So we've got that. And then, of course, several others that are in the back that are signed. So we have some other odd and end stuff as well that'll be going out. So make sure to please, after the show, make sure to give a thumbs up and comment. And if you haven't already subscribed and hit the notification button, if you have hit that notification button, if you hit it again, it's going to pop up with a few options, and then you can pick the one that says, to allow all notifications for this channel. And that way you're not missing any information. And then also share it, please, with your friends and family. We want to hit that milestone. And I'm super excited to be doing that. So again, thank you everybody for being here. So without further ado, let's go ahead and introduce James Blackwell. Hello, hello.
Well, hello, Carolee. It's great to have this opportunity to share with you and with your viewers.
Thank you. I'm really excited to have a conversation. It's, I enjoy having conversations with our veterans, and just hearing about the different perceptions of different things. Where I've always said you can have two people in the military standing side by side in the exact same situation, and each one has a different take on how things were going on, what was going on around them, etc. The same thing with, if you give two people the exact same food and you ask them to describe it, they're going to describe it both differently. So I really enjoy hearing the stories, and I know our veterans do as well. It helps them to understand, that they can talk about their time, and it's okay. This channel is, judgment free. And so however you want to tell your story is just fine with us. So thank you again.
You're quite welcome. And you're right. I like to, I spent most of my career as a military analyst, and I explained to people, especially my students, it's like it's like observing a pitcher throw a curveball or a screwball. Okay, if you're on the third base side, you see one thing. If you're on the first base side, you see it a different way behind home plate, and if the center field camera, um, you do see the same thing from a
Yes.
different perspective.
Yeah, you really do. And it's just great to hear the stories and get people talking and make sure that our veterans, whether you were in combat or not, I mean, and truly what combat, those who are overseas at any given time, I think what they equate to only around 18%
Yeah.
of the military, so um we have to make sure that we include those who were not deployed because they're the backbone of our military, and we love and cherish them just as much. They're just as integral to the rest. So appreciate that. But I'm going to start off by asking the question of what James Blackwell was like as a kid. Who was James Blackwell in his younger
I'm not sure you want to know, Carolee. No, I appreciate the question. I was a good kid, I think. I was an Army brat, um, born at the hospital at Aberdeen Proving Grounds, Maryland.
Oh, wow.
Uh, and I think my dad was drinking buddies at the time with the famous Orioles coach, Cal Ripken Sr.
No
Um,
kidding.
no kidding. And the American Legion, the Bernard L. Tobin chapter of the American Legion there in Aberdeen. But anyway, I was an Army brat, grew up there the first 5 or 6 years. Actually, we've got photographs to prove it. I was in Germany with my mom and dad, 1953 to 54 or 55. It was still occupied Germany at the time.
Oh, wow.
And it was a very interesting time. Um, and was there again during the Cuban Missile Crisis on my father's second deployment to Germany. So that
Oh,
was another
wow.
very interesting time to be in Germany with American forces. I mean, I was in the Boy Scouts, Cub Scouts, um, played Little League baseball, everything a kid would do, but I did it in like 6 or 7 different towns and cities across the country and around the world for that
Yeah,
matter.
I was gonna say around the world for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
Did you like school? Were you studious at all?
I don't know that I was studious. I guess I liked school. I do recall, even in your 70s, you have these recurring memories. I distinctly remember the day that it was like springtime or early summer, um, and I was in first grade. Miss Brown, Miss Brown. I don't know what it was that was going on, but she was going on and on and on and on, and I was a 6-year-old, and I was really bored, and I said, "Oh, shut up."
Whoops.
That was not a fun day, and that was in the 50s, so they had ways. In
Right? A
public schools.
switch, a
Uh,
paddle, you name
but
it.
actually, I didn't get any of that. Instead, what I didn't know was that for lunch, she had planned on taking the class outside, sit under the trees, and enjoy an ice cream cone on her.
Oh,
And so I was not allowed to participate in that particular activity that day. So I think that was the last time I was sassy to my teachers as I was growing up. So
see?
I I enjoyed school. I did okay, and I suppose I have other memories, but that one sticks with me.
So as you got older, you get into high school,
Yeah,
did you get into any sports?
I did. I was great at. I thought I was great at playing baseball, um, and I did play all the way through high school as American Legion ball. I had to work. I was still an Army brat, so if I wanted a school ring and things like that, I took a job at the pizza parlor on post. Had enough time to play American Legion ball in the summer, um,
What position did you play?
and I was a catcher. Uh,
My
uh,
favorite position of all of them.
well,
Absolute my favorite is the catcher.
it was exhausting. But I didn't play on any high school teams. And I've often wondered, how in the world did I get into West Point when I didn't play any varsity sports in high school? I think it was the contributing factor was that American Legion baseball, because it's
Yeah.
recognized as pretty
Well, and it
competitive.
didn't hurt that your dad was Army, right?
No, if you were the child of a serving Army person, you were eligible for a different category of appointments. But really, they kind of threw everybody in the same hopper. I suppose there were some political appointments, but it's pretty competitive across the board.
And even more so now, I would think.
I think so. So I got in as an alternate. I qualified as an alternate, but I had to wait for somebody to turn down an appointment before I could get in. And
How long
that
did you have to
happened
wait?
just a couple of months. I think I got the telegram in May. By the way, that's how they communicated quick messages in those days. You got a telegram delivered to your door.
A little
Um,
fun note here in regard to that. It would have I was just out of high school when I went full time with the company, Western Union
oh my goodness.
Corporation.
Yeah.
So the telegrams and the mailgrams and the money orders and yep, I did it all. I
Yeah.
did singing telegrams too.
Oh, no way. Give me an
I honestly.
example, Carolee. Come on.
Well, for anybody's birthday that might be today, we ready? It was happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. And so on. So,
That's
okay.
very good. You keep the tune very well.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I love to sing. That's one of the things I really enjoy. And another interesting fact, I have sung the national anthem at minor league ball games
No
in
way.
Nevada. Yes.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So, see, we have a lot in common going on here.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, I'm a lifelong Baltimore Orioles fan. So
I was going to ask what your favorite team was. Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, good. Yes. Braves. That's always been mine is the Atlanta Braves and um my favorite catcher was Greg Olson with the
Oh
Atlanta
yeah.
Braves.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Yes, and I felt so bad in the World Series when he was at home plate and the runner was coming into home and he ended up. I mean, I think he got that out, but he broke his leg or his
Yeah.
ankle or something. So.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the extent of my knowledge of sports. I know more about baseball than anything else. I was a president of a Babe Ruth baseball league in
Oh.
Nevada, and I had 22 teams. We had a team we'd won state and went to nationals.
Oh
Um,
wow.
and yeah, it was really impressive. And the team did excellent, came in fifth place.
That's
One of
awesome.
the kids who I'd known since he was in Little League ended up signing with the Marlins.
Oh wow. So
Yeah, he wasn't there long. I think only maybe a year or two is all, but I can say I knew him when.
yeah. Well, I didn't know any of my fellows who went pro, but I was on a little league all-star team when my father was stationed in Germany in the early '60s. I played for the Baumholder Army Base Little League All Stars, and we got beat in the first round by Bitburg Air Force Base. So that's
Oh,
the way it went.
well, but
But it was pretty cool.
yeah, it happens. Disappointment is part of life, and we learn from it. We look back at those
Yeah.
memories, right? And we're like, gosh, can't believe we made it that far, even.
Yeah.
So that's excellent. So, okay, you graduate high school. You have the opportunity then to go to West Point at that point,
Yes. I
and
had to go to West Point. My parents couldn't afford to send me anywhere else, so I had an incentive to get accepted. So you had to show up with like $350 as a deposit for all the initial issue things they give you in case you drop out before early. and they keep it to pay for it. And it was hard to scrape that $350 together, but
Yeah.
sold a
Well,
lot of pizzas.
that's a great thing. So did you ever get insight from your dad about like PT and running and all of the, the different things that would prep you outside of, the education of West Point,
Yeah,
did you?
he was a smart man. Early work on computers. Um, I think he was a bit of a renegade in his own high school days, and but he played baseball and basketball. And he actually, when he was in the Army, he was a Golden Gloves boxing champion. So he was
Oh,
always my idol for physical fitness. I never knew how he threw that ball so hard to teach me how to play catch. Um, so he was very good, and he had a lot of faults, but spending time with me, teaching me how to play baseball was not one of them.
nice. And so he gave you kind of an insight of what to expect
Yeah.
when you got into West Point, I would assume.
Oh yeah, yeah. He talked a lot about his experiences in the Army.
Yeah.
But there's a sad part of that story that I don't mind sharing, and that was he became during the Vietnam War. He came home and quickly became an alcoholic. He was never abusive towards me, but I was the oldest and was gone. But my siblings, I have six brothers and sisters, and they do share some of the um, agonizing and traumatic moments that they had. Um, and as I've looked into our family history, I'm convinced there's a genetic uh, twist to it. Um, and so it's an addiction, and it's an addiction that could afflict anyone. Um, and it's a matter of developing self-control to keep it from becoming a beast. Um,
Yeah,
so
and that's not easy. I mean, any kind of an addiction is not easy for an
yeah,
individual to stop.
yeah. So
And a
he
lot of
died.
that is habit, right?
It is. You develop it, and it's hard to break it. He died at an early age. He was only 50 when he died
Oh,
of
goodness.
a massive heart attack brought on by the alcoholism. Although he had been dry for 3 or 4 years, he he turned his life turned around. He found the Lord as his savior and quit drinking, quit smoking. But the damage was already done,
Yeah,
and he gave me and my mother a few sweet years towards the end. Um, uh, but anyone can turn around with the right
I agree.
combination of
Yeah,
influences in your life.
I agree with that. I think that's a great sentiment for sure.
Yeah.
And that you have some good memories,
Yes,
like
I
you
do.
said at the end. I think that's excellent. And um, so for that, I'm grateful. So how was it then for you? You first step foot there at West Point. What was it like? Like in your head, what's going through your mind?
Um, why did I do this? You can see on YouTube, some of the recreations of first day at Beast Barracks, even in the old days when I was there. Um, and I understand it's not all that different nowadays.
Wow. So they
Uh,
haven't really changed a whole lot.
if you
Interesting.
take a look at uh, I forgot the name of the movie where the Marine Corps drill sergeant welcomes in the two enlistees into the Marines. Big movie about it. I'm going to remember it before the conversation is over, but it was a
There
lot
you
like
go.
that.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I've seen so many military movies. I can't-
Yeah,
and I'm really bad with names. I'm really bad with titles.
yeah.
So it's like I've always been that way. So um okay. So
So
how long
it
did
was a rough 8 weeks where they teach you all the basic military stuff about appearance and uniform and drill and ceremony and traditions and those kinds of things, plus all the West Point stuff
right.
that is its own legacy. Um, uh, and so you think you're never going to make it, and it is so tough. But then the first day of the school year opens up in late August, early September, and all of a sudden there's three more upper classes there, and they outnumber you 4-1. And so
It's like being in high school.
it's more
Or it's
than
freshman.
more of the same, because now you can't get away with nothing during the school year.
Wow. So Jason said he had a friend of his that went to West Point, and he'd gone in 1996.
Uh-huh.
So, and I'm sure there's quite a few that have been through there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Jason, that's a great legacy. I'm glad you had that friend. I'm sure he could tell some stories on us.
Did it take you long at all to get yourself um, acquainted with everything and kind of in the swing of how they do things?
I
I mean,
don't think
discipline,
so.
I'm assuming you had
Yeah, I was just
because
going
you
to
were.
say, my dad kind of ran the household. You couldn't find, it wasn't a tight ship because it was an Army ship, but I was accustomed to the rigor and the routine. Plus, I worked on my way through high school. Um, so, I, I mean, the yelling and the screaming at you, it kind of was okay. But the discipline and having to learn a lot, um, uh, it didn't come to me as a huge shock. But a lot of my classmates just weren't expecting it. It was interesting, and in some cases, not so pleasant to see how they reacted to it. I had a roommate who had been in the Army for 2 years prior to coming to West Point, and he just kept saying, "I can't put up with this bull. I can't put up with this another
What?
day." And finally, he did. He resigned and left and went back home and went to work at a hometown factory and did quite well. Um, but yeah, a lot of guys, you know, his was a very interesting experience. There were some people who were recruited for sports, um, who still had to go through the rigors of beast barracks, and they didn't want to. So some of them decided to leave.
Wow.
The others who stayed, though, I mean, we had some great sports teams in those days. And today, of course, Army was ranked in the top 20 this year and got
Yeah.
to a bowl.
Yeah.
So it's not to say anything bad about Army sports, because it's quite a development program.
Well, did you have any funny stories about your time there at West Point that you can recall?
You know, I've watched a couple of your previous podcasts, and I knew you were going to ask that question. So I was kind of wrestling with what to reveal.
Well,
Um,
open
but
book, I heard. You're an open book. Let's
yeah,
hear.
I'm afraid so. The the that first week of academics, when all of the upperclassmen descend on you, it's called reorganization week, and it's a hell week. Um,
Okay, yeah.
so at one point, and I was okay. I was kind of a cipher, I mean, I tried to stay out of the limelight. I didn't do anything really bad to draw attention to myself, and I let other guys get in trouble, and 4-1 on him. But towards the end, the upperclassmen had this trick. They would say, "Mr. Blackwell, look down at my shoes and your shoes. Whose shoes are shined better?" Now, there's only one answer to that question, right? And I knew
Yeah.
what the answer was. But in a moment of um, stupidity,
I wondered if that was the word you were choosing.
I said, "Mine, sir." But not only did I say "mine, sir," I said "mine, sir," and then I used an expletive that I'd never used before, never used shit since, and I certainly should not have used it at the time. And I became the focal point for about 3 or 4 days of every upperclassman's, attempt to teach me that we don't do that. We don't tell upperclassmen our shoes are better than theirs, even if they are. And we
I have
certainly
a
don't use
question.
profanity in the process of doing so.
And nowadays, now I can't obviously speak for Army or any of the branches other than the Marine Corps, because you may know I have two
Yeah.
Marine veterans. And with them, like it's when they go through boot camp, they're expected and almost required to use curse words.
Oh, yeah. I
Uh,
mean, and I spent 13 years in the Army, and I told my kids this: don't use that word in my house.
yeah,
But Dad, I said, look, I went 13 years in the Army. You can't find a profane word that I don't know about and know
right,
what it means.
exactly right.
So yeah, I mean, the Army was just like it, Carolee.
And it's so interesting because as they, as they are growing up, it's exactly that, right? I don't ever want to hear those words coming out of
Yeah,
your mouth. Don't you talk like that, in front of me. And it's great. And then they turn 18 and they join the military and they come back and like it's an adjective, a noun, a verb. Oh,
yeah,
so
yeah,
one whole sentence has that one word in it like 5 times.
yeah,
And you're like, excuse me? So, and
yeah,
it's like, "Oh, I'm so
yeah.
sorry."
And of course, in the Army, that's behavior that you're not going to change.
No,
Um,
no,
it's part of the culture, so you can move on to other things that.
yep.
Although I've known some people in an office situation that have a cuss word jar. Every time you use a cuss word in their presence, you got to put $1 in the jar, um, and then that,
I
you know,
like that one.
yeah, yeah,
And the other one I like, just for fun, a money jar
yeah.
for if my family members can't find something and I can.
Oh dear, oh my. Well, I wouldn't try that one.
I did that a couple times with one of my sons, and yeah, he's like, "Yeah, no, I'm not doing that anymore," because it was
Yeah,
like $5 a time.
yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah. I'll
But
find it. I'll find it.
yeah, yeah. No, now he doesn't care, but
Yeah,
he won't
he
bet
won't say
that I
I
can
can't
find it.
find it.
Yeah, yeah. So, um, that's great. So
That reminds me,
yeah,
back to my dad. Um, he said, you cannot use the word I can't. Jimmy, I want you to go do this. I want you to do that. I can't. He said, the word I can't is not in the Blackwell vocabulary. You can do what I'm asking you to do and anything that you want to do. So give it a try. So that
I
was
love
another
that.
positive thing about my upbringing.
Oh, I love that. Absolutely love that. So tell me how is West Point and being in those barracks different from because I'm assuming did you still have to go through like army boot camp then?
Well, the first 8 weeks of West Point, as I said, is essentially boot camp.
Okay.
Um,
So you
the
don't have to
upperclassmen,
do that and then a boot camp.
it, no, it was all the same that same summer, and then each summer after that, you had another aspect of military training, um, and sometimes it was out there with the regular soldiers who were going through the same training. So, for example, I went to airborne school at Fort Benning, and that we had a company of cadets, but we were right next to soldiers that were going through jump school, and we had the same black hat, um, sergeants training us, making sure we knew how to do a parachute land and fall and all that good stuff.
That sounds like an interesting thing to learn. And so that was after you graduate from West Point
No,
and
that's
or
in
how
the
does that
summers
work?
in between your. That's in the summer in between your academic years. You would be sent out to Army schools from time to time, either jump
Okay.
school or Ranger school or Pathfinder. Sometimes you could go on an academic summer trip and do something like that. Uh, and there was one summer where they send you out into a real live Army unit and you serve as a lieutenant
Oh,
in
wow.
an Army unit. And in our day, the Army was really short of officers, and it was a pretty rough place in the 1970s to be in the, it was still the Vietnam era Army, and there were a lot of things going on. So I went over to Germany and was in a platoon that hadn't had a platoon leader in over a year. And it had all the issues associated with the Vietnam era Army now moving into peacetime. It was a tank platoon, and they really needed an injection of leadership, even junior, relatively inexperienced men. So it was real. It was real Army, is the point.
Yeah, yeah. So Jason asked. He wanted to know if West Point was like a college, but I think from what I'm hearing from you, it's a little bit of both, right? You're learning the military way and life, but you're also going through your basic training, if you will.
Yeah, that's correct, Carolee. Jason, it's a fully accredited university and an Army training and education institution. There are a lot of academic courses you get at West Point you wouldn't get at a normal university. In fact, they have a whole military leadership department that provides instruction. The history department has a focus on military history. You would even in my day it was almost strictly an engineering school, and so engineering projects. My senior year engineering project was to design a replacement for the Army's scout vehicle. And the Army was at the time going through the process of designing and building a new one. And so we had all kinds of problems to solve associated with building a new scout vehicle, a gun, an engine, transmission, armor plating, all those things you had to get involved, not the whole thing from scratch, but different aspects of the design. So yes, it's both. And it's a very intense 4 years of your life.
So you graduate.
Yeah.
Did you go straight then into the Army, or?
Yeah, you get a month or so of leave, but you have an assignment. You'll probably go to a school first. So
Okay.
as an armor officer, I went to Fort Knox to the armor school to learn how to run Army tank platoons. And then that's only a couple of months, and then they send you out to your assigned unit, and you're expected to lead, 40 to 60 men in whatever kind of unit you're in: infantry, armor, quartermaster, medical. They put
How
West
was
Point
that for you? Because by this time, what are you, 19, 20? No, you're old.
21,
Yeah.
22. So you're just like all the other lieutenants who show up brand new. It's not Lieutenant Dan, okay?
That's
great. That was a great story.
Yeah.
And I suppose there were units in Vietnam like that. But this was post-Vietnam. By the time, it's interesting. I came into the Army too late to go to Vietnam. When we went to West Point in 1970, they were sending West Point and Army lieutenants to Vietnam. But by the time we graduated, the United States had quit sending troops there. And so you had a lot of the legacy of the post-Vietnam Army to deal with. I even had I'm a second lieutenant, and I had at least one sergeant, a platoon sergeant, who had been a captain in the Army in Vietnam. And then when the Army got smaller, he had the option to, instead of being discharged, to accept an enlistment option. So he stayed in as a sergeant first class and was one of my platoon sergeants. Now that had an interesting dynamic because he had a lot more experience at leadership than I did, but he was subordinate to me.
And that was kind of, I think, where I was going with that, because it was, that had to be a little difficult on both sides, right? You're young and still learning the ins and outs, and and he's already kind of been there, done that kind of.
Whether or not they were an officer or had grown up in the Army as a non-commissioned a sergeant, every lieutenant has to learn how to be a lieutenant and how to lead people that have more experience than they do. And it's not
Did you
an
ever
easy
get
thing.
flack back from them?
No, no, he was very supportive.
Excellent.
As long as you're willing to learn and listen as well as give orders, um, they often, and certainly was my experience, they take pride in the lieutenant. I'll tell you one story about that. Uh, when I was a platoon leader, my platoon sergeant, um, Sergeant First Class John Daly, he was an interesting character, typical Army senior enlisted, was a great leader, and he kind of took me in his confidence, took me by the arm and said, "Sir, I think I would recommend you do this way or handle this that way." And we were on a deployment over to Germany, and we were living in pup tents. The soldiers got a day off, and they were allowed to go into town, and you know the soldiers will be soldiers. So he said, "Sir, I think we ought to go downtown, down to the Ville, and make sure our troops are okay." And so we'd walk down the Ville with all these strip joints and bars, and we just poke our head in to make sure our guys weren't getting themselves in trouble. And it was very interesting. A couple of times, you know, he would go in and pull a guy out so he wouldn't get into trouble. A couple of times he would bring me with him, but sometimes he would say, "Sir, you don't want to go in there." So uh, uh, Sergeant Daly taught me how to be a good Army officer. Well, 30 years later, I'm on CNN. I'm the world's most visible military analyst in the Gulf War of 1991. I'm not making this up, really.
Right.
And so we're about to go into the ground war in 1991, and people were very concerned that our guy's going to get killed in this ground war. Why don't we just beat Saddam Hussein from the air? And I felt my job as an announcer, as an analyst on the air, was to try to let people know these guys are trained. We're going to be okay. There'll be some casualties, but we're going to win this thing, and we're going to come out just fine. And so I tried to pepper my commentary with that kind of reassurance, as well as the notion of just explaining what's happening. Well, one night in the studio, the producers come out and say, "Dr. Blackwell, you've got a phone call. It's somebody named John Daly. Do you want to take the call?" I said, "John Daly?
Why does that name sound so familiar?
So, the guy's crying in his beer. I'm so glad, sir, you're doing this. My son is a tank driver in an M1 tank in the Gulf War. And you just set me straight. You told me not to worry, and I realized I didn't need to worry." So that was the highlight of my career, my very brief, moment of attention and glory in the world. So, that is part of the legacy that the American Army's non-commissioned officers give to the country, and that is well-trained leaders that they've trained from the bottom up.
Jason says
Thank you,
he
Jason. I
remembers
appreciate
seeing
it.
you
Not many
on.
people. That tells me that you're not a young man.
Right. Well, I remember seeing you actually on TV as well.
Yeah.
And once I found out that you were a CNN analyst, so I was like, because I remember when that popped off, and I remember sitting in front of the television and going,
Yeah.
and that fear, of
Yeah.
just exactly that. So, he said that the John Daly, I think he's thinking about me, that I might be thinking of is the pro golfer from the 90s. But I want to think that at one point there was another John Daly that I had a guest that had spoke of, but I could be wrong. But so okay, so you, because I definitely want to get into your time with CNN and being the analyst there, but I kind of want to know how you went from the lieutenant and such, and moved your way up to major. So can you walk me through all of that?
I had a pretty typical Army career. I was stationed at Fort Bliss as a lieutenant and went through each of the steps that a young lieutenant goes through. I was a platoon leader and then an executive officer and then a staff officer and finally a company commander, a cavalry troop commander. And then they sent me to advanced training. I went to the infantry officer advanced course at Fort Benning. And from there, the Army picked me to go back and go to the faculty at West Point. So
Oh,
my next 5 years was really academic. They sent me to grad school, paid for 2 years to get my master's degree. I paid and did the extra work to get the PhD. I told my wife, I said, why would I want to get a PhD? And she said, look, my daddy was a welder. You want to get as much education as you can. I said, but we have to pay for it. The Army's not going to pay for us to get a PhD. That's okay. We'll make it. And so ended up with a PhD and had 3 years teaching at West Point. My next assignment was Fort Lewis, Washington. So by now I'm a captain. I didn't mess anything up, so I got promoted on time. Sent me out to Fort Lewis, Washington, and I was in an experimental unit. This outfit had 117 dune buggies, and
okay.
we were launching laser guided missiles off of a Dodge pickup trucks. I mean, this was unheard of at the time in the
Oh, wow.
early 1980s, and it was great. Then. So I got promoted to major again. I had a very mediocre on-time career, if you will.
No, I
Um,
think that's great because I mean, you've said you were in for 13 years.
yeah, and then
So,
at some point I was on a field problem, and I started having severe pain, blood in my urine, big chunks of material. And I was the battalion XO, so all the staff worked for me. I went to the doctor and I said, look, doc, we got this big field problem. Just give me the drugs and let me drive on. He said, okay, all right. So he gave me the sulfa medication. He said, but let me take your blood test first and let's take a urine test. It turned out he saved my life because I had type 1 diabetes. And at that point in time in 1987, you could continue to serve in the Army with type 1 diabetes, but you had severe restrictions on where you could be deployed and what kind of unit. I would no longer be working with troops. I'd be flying a desk somewhere.
wow.
And at that point, I could choose to not ask for a waiver and the Army would grant it because I was unqualified for my profession. The Army went through the medical and physical evaluation board process and decided I was retired medically, but only with 10% disability. So I had to continue to work.
Right.
And with PhD, I was able to get a job at a think tank in Washington. So really, I had a fairly normal Army career. Although I would add at the time, just as a nuance, the Army was getting smaller. And so if you had not gotten promoted on time to captain or major, you were basically told, we don't need you anymore. And they were forced out of the Army without any benefits. And so that was happening at the time. That was another motivation, is that why would I want to go through a medical board 2 or 3 more times just to make it to 20 years and retire normally? Because they may decide not, if the Army keeps getting smaller,
You'd be one of the first to go, I would think.
I'd be reviewed every time.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
as it turned out, I got out. I said I got out. I got in the Army too late, a little too late for the Vietnam War, and I got out a little too early for the Gulf War of '91. And I watched all my classmates and friends go on to fight in that war and later.
So since we've gotten to the end of the
Yeah.
military career, I want to ask the question about resources. So I'm going to make the assumption, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that you were not provided resources of what you needed to do to transition into the civilian world. Is that correct?
Um, I don't. Yeah, they were okay. We got medical benefits from myself and my family. We could shop at the PX, and I got 10% disability, which was 10% pay of what a major was making in um, uh, 1987. And At that point, it was not a lot. We had gotten what I called the Ronald Reagan pay raise back in the early 80s. So no, I had to go find a work, and my wife had to work. If that's the kind of resources you're talking about, no, we had to start a new life, new careers all over.
But more along the lines of, for integrating back into the civilian world
No,
to, you know,
there were no transition programs
yes.
in those days. There are obviously now.
Correct.
Uh,
And it's just for me, it's
yeah,
interesting to at some point I'm going to have a guest and we're going to be able to merge that timeline of when it actually started happening.
yeah, yeah, that's right. And so no, there were no. I did get a call from a four-star general. Blackwell, why are you getting out of the army? We need you. I said, well, sir, can you promise me I'd go back? I could serve with troops, because otherwise, you'll haul me into the Pentagon and make me work there for the next 10 years. And so that was the only transition coaching that I had.
Don't do it, please. So, okay. Then you go from there and where do you start your employment, your civilian employment?
I landed a job at a think tank in Washington, the Center for Strategic and International Studies. And I was the low guy on the stick, low person on the stick. I mean, all these people had PhDs and had been working in Washington and the policy community. I mean, I was CSIS at that time had Henry Kissinger and James Schlesinger and Zbigniew Brzezinski and folks of Harold Brown, folks of that caliber who had been secretaries of defense and state and had done all these great things. Um, and uh, I was kind of low man on the totem pole and had to do whatever they didn't want to do in terms of
Right.
study and analysis. And the first task I got was they had gotten a grant in 1987 to hold a conference on the 200th anniversary of the signing of the United States Constitution and its relevance for national security. And the senior person, was not much of an organizer. He was a big thinker and a great writer and a diplomat, a fantastic one. But he was always used to having staff around him. He had not had any staff. So Blackwell, your first job is to make this conference work. Um, and so, I knew how to run conferences. So, and I wasn't afraid to rub shoulders with these folks because I knew they had to have it done too. So,
Right.
uh,
Yeah.
uh,
And you get
so
to, you put that fear and all that aside and let's get her
you just
done.
get the job done. That's right.
So, okay. So, how long did you do that? How long were you there?
I was at the think tank for during the Gulf War, and I think I left in '93 when I got recruited to go help a defense contractor start a new business practice in defense analysis. And
Wow.
so I went over there. They didn't offer me much of a pay raise, but a lot of corporate incentives that I wasn't even aware of. There turned out to be pretty nice.
Always a
Because
plus, right?
the company grew, and we did quite well doing studies and analysis. And I was at that think tank for about, or that contractor for about 12, 13 years.
Wow.
Got recruited away to another contractor for a couple of years. And along the way, I was selected by uh, James Schlesinger, former Secretary of Defense, to be his staff director, his executive director, for a couple of investigations that he was picked to run. So I ran the staff for him on the investigation into the Abu Ghraib
Yeah.
detention matters. And then
That
a few
just
years
seems like
after
it was
that,
yesterday. Oh my
yeah,
gosh.
And then that was in 2003 or four.
Yeah.
And then in 2008, he hired me again because the Air Force had mishandled some nuclear weapons. And the defense secretary fired the chief staff and the secretary of the Air Force and asked Jim Schlesinger to put a team together to figure out why this happened. And again, he picked me to run the staff and basically to lead the investigation. And then, so I did that for a year. And then the Air Force realized and had a lot of details about what it had done wrong, what needed to be fixed. And they had very visionary new chief of staff, General Nordy Schwartz, and new Secretary of the Air Force, Mike Donnelly, who were determined to fix it and make sure it didn't happen again. And so they appointed me to be on the air staff temporarily. I guess because I knew where all the skeletons were in the closet, right?
Right.
And so worked there for 2 years for that appointment and got reappointed a couple more times until the Air Force got its whole nuclear enterprise on its feet. And frankly, by the last year or two, they were running away with it. They were doing just fine, leading the whole Defense Department in how to manage nuclear weapons and how to conduct nuclear deterrence in the modern era.
Was it
That's my story.
was it hard learning about the nuclear stuff?
No, I had studied nuclear physics and nuclear weapons at West Point, and when I was in the Army still had nuclear weapons, so I was around them all the time. Actually, for a short time as a major, had the codes for our weapons, had control over the codes. So I left that behind in 1987, but was never too far from it in the think tank and in the defense contractor world because I was doing analysis. But it, it doesn't change an awful lot. And so by the time I got to the Air Force, I was pretty familiar with the business.
Nice. So okay, so you leave there, and then what was the next progression for you?
Well, my next and last job was when I left the Air Force. I went to work for a federally funded research and development center, kind of a government-sponsored think tank called the Institute for Defense Analyses, and was brought in by them to help them do the independent analysis that they do for the Department of Defense on nuclear weapons and deterrence. So I did that for another 5 or 6 years before I decided to retire in January of 2023 at the age of 71.
Okay, so let's go back a little bit because I'm curious. I mean, I know you talked about, the where you went on CNN and and kind of talked about that, but was it just that one time or did you do that more often?
I did that for about 10 years total. Now,
And where did that fit in your time frame?
yeah. Now, as a I had no idea I was going to do that. I had no desire to do it,
Right.
frankly.
Yeah.
But as a think tank person, the networks and actually around the world, they were always looking for a military analyst to bring on the air, to help make their reporters look smart, right? And so oftentimes they would just call the think tanks. Who do you have available to talk about this subject or that topic? And so, you went by seniority at these places. So they would go to Kissinger and Schlesinger and Brzezinski, and I was at the bottom of the list. So occasionally I would get to appear. I'll never forget. Katie Couric was a cub reporter on Channel 4 in Washington, D.C. I don't even remember what the subject was, but I drew the short straw and had to go, educate this young lass who was, trying to become a reporter on NBC.
Yeah, she'd have been
And
young.
I don't even remember what the subject was, but she was charming and she was smart. And that was it. So anyway, I got to do sort of low level, a lot of foreign broadcast, Canadian broadcasting, French. I mean, They couldn't get the big names. But then when the Gulf War opened up, everybody was in high demand. And I had just left the Army. So I kind of knew what the operational concepts were, how the United States would likely fight the war. And that was when I was talking about it to try to reassure Americans that, we're going to be okay. And one night, Ted Koppel was looking for somebody who would be on his show Nightline, right?
Yep.
Right down the street from our think tank. And 11, he was on at 11 o'clock. Nobody wanted to be up that late. So CSIS sent me down a couple blocks away, got up there, and he had a sand table. Now, if you've been in the military, you know that a sand table is a ideal training device. You build a model of the terrain you're going to cover to approximate what it would look like, and you move little models of tanks and soldiers around and guns to get a feel for how your operation might go. Well, he had a sand table in his studio, and man, I had died and gone to heaven. And so I, explained how the Gulf War might go. This was in, I think, September or October of 1990. And when it was pretty clear we were going to go to war. And I didn't realize it. That was a screen test. Suddenly, I was in demand by all the networks all the time. They didn't want Kissinger and Brzezinski anymore. They wanted a guy who knew what was going to happen on the ground. There were very, very few of us. So, and I was not a general, right?
Right.
So that's how that all got started. And so I spent a lot of time between October of 1990 and January of 91. Then on January 16th, 91, when ultimately the war did break out, I got a call from networks. Would you come into our studio? Because we're thinking something might happen and, we'd like some expert advice. Well, it turned out was they were offering contracts. So I signed on with CNN. I had no idea who was going to be better or worse, but CBS wanted me to go to New York for the duration of the war. And I told my wife, I'm not going to leave you with the kids while I'm up in New York. So I signed on with CNN, and it turned out that was the day the war broke out. And they kind of had a hint that it was. So that started it. And for the next 44 days, I spent just about every day, 8-10 hours a day in the studio with a couple of breaks every now and then.
And what was it like for you? I mean, mentally, kind of going through the process.
I was in my element. I had been a division operations officer, so I had run a command center for the Army, integrating air and ground and artillery. And so I kind of set it up that way. What I had to learn how to do was to boil it down to a 15-second soundbite. And then give it to
tough.
Bernard Shaw or,
Yeah.
the guys out in the field that were covering it for CNN. But I felt like I adapted pretty quickly, and they made me feel like I fit right in.
Excellent. And that is why, as I said, I kind of went back and just did some looking because it's like the name, and after hearing that, you had been with CNN, I was like trying to get my mind to, to remember that time frame because, back then when that war had popped, it was like everybody was kind of glued to the TV.
Yeah. And I don't know if it jogged your memory or not because my hair was darker, my face was thinner. I've got videos. They gave me, my mom used her cassette recorder, right, to videotape every appearance on CNN during the Gulf War. I have them. I haven't gone through them, but CNN did give me copies of many of those appearances, and I've edited them down. You can see them on my YouTube channel. There's a couple of them I think I have up there on videos, not on the 307th playlist, but on my videos. So you can see how it once was.
Yeah, that's excellent. Like I said, I mean, oh my gosh, it's like being transported back to another time frame
Yeah.
because in a way it seems like a really long time ago when
Yeah. Well, it was. It was.
put it to a calendar, but
Yeah.
in your head it's just like it was a
Yeah.
month ago.
Well, it was one of those significant emotional events that they call it.
It,
It'll stick with you for a
it
while.
really was.
But, uh, but that my classmates from West Point fought that war, and so that experience now I look back on as part of my preparation for my calling today, and that is to serve veterans, not just Gulf War veterans, but Afghanistan, Iraq veterans, uh, World War II, and Korean War veterans. And Carolee, each war, there's something common that they all share, but each war also left them with something unique. Um, and they're ready to talk about it, but mostly to themselves.
Right.
Um, they don't get the opportunity for young people to listen, and they're okay with that. Um, so anyway, part of my mission now that I'm retired but working on these projects is to motivate people, especially young people, to go find a veteran, seek them out, be friends with them, and just listen. And if they don't want to talk about their combat experience, don't try to be an amateur psychologist and pry it out of them. Just listen. And if they're willing to talk about their combat, listen with ready ears and learn from them, because it's a precious gift you've been given if you get that opportunity. So that's what I try to do. And when I'm telling people about my next book, about 10 gunners from the Korean War, 10 men who manned the machine guns on the B-29. I mean, that's the lowest job on the airplane in some people's minds. But I found 10 of them and I got their stories and I put them in this book. So read their stories, buy the book, and buy one and give it to a vet. And
Right.
let them read about their colleagues, and then just sit back and listen to them, what memories it brings up in their minds. And so that is, I think, therapeutic for the veteran, and it certainly is educational for the coming generations. Gen Z, Gen X, they know K-pop, they know Korean cuisine, right? It's all popular
Yes.
now. But
Yeah.
this was a totally different era. They know their own parents and grandparents, but the Korean War generation is very, very different. You'll learn so much about them if you just sit down and listen to them. And what I've learned in the last couple of years of fellowshipping with them is that they're quiet. They don't draw attention to themselves. That they didn't get a parade when they came back from Korea.
That's
And
correct.
5 years earlier, the greatest generation, of course, was hailed as heroes, and they rightly were. But we didn't win the Korean War. We didn't lose it
Right.
either, like we lost the Vietnam War. So the reception was so very different and really unique in America's history. So I encourage young people, trying to find ways to market the book to young people so that they will put themselves into that mindset, and then go, seek out a Korean War veteran before they go away. They're going away. There's less than 500,000 of them now,
Right.
and there'll be less than 100,000 of them in 5 years.
And interestingly, I had met not long ago a Vietnam veteran, and he was really hesitant about wanting to come on and tell his story. However, we had just hit it off and had become friends, and he finally had called me one day and said, I tried to get some other veterans to come on and nobody, was really interested. And again, primarily Vietnam veterans. So, understandably. And he goes, but I guess I'll have to come on and tell my story. And I said, well, that's up to you. And you can,
Yeah.
talk about whatever. So he calls me again and he says, I've got a kid that I'd like to have come on with me.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
this child. I mean, he is a child. He's, um, 12 or something like that. Now, he absolutely loves the
Yeah.
military. He loves dressing in the different eras of military garb. He and several people, like his dad had been in the military. So he actually has a lot of his dad's military
Yeah.
uniforms, dress uniforms and stuff. And he recreated his dad's um photo in the military.
Oh,
So,
oh,
yeah,
cool.
down to the pinky ring and, the way he was sitting, it was quite impressive, but it made and I was okay with that because it really did make, um, my guest feel a little bit more at ease, and he was so impressed with this kid because I mean, and really, I think he just I wanted him to feel comfortable too. So
Yeah.
it was one of those. It was like I am so
Yeah.
happy to bring him on and hear his side. So that's if you have the opportunity, it's an
Yeah.
interview with
Oh,
Marley Levine.
Carolee, Carolee, what you're doing is so important, and I just pray that your subscribership will expand greatly,
Thank you.
because they just want to listen. And you know, uh, my wife's father was a World War II veteran,
Oh, wow.
landed at Normandy with the infantry, fought his way across France and Germany. Um, and I got to know my father-in-law pretty well. They're Cajuns, right? And so you have to listen real carefully, just because their accent is unique. Um, but he would share his wartime experiences very sparingly. He was
Oh, yeah.
comfortable
Yeah.
sharing a few things, with me, his son-in-law, with his children, but that left such an impression on his children. My wife Rosalie, especially, she cherishes those memories of what he was able to tell her about war was like. And for so many of us, that's the only way you're going to know what war was like.
Read.
So
Yes.
it's so important. And so Rosalie and I went on a trip once. I was on a business trip to Europe. She came along, and we were able to uh, go to Normandy, by not on a tour, but by ourselves, and sort of imagine what it was like for her father, and have these marvelous photographs of Rosalie along Omaha Beach in the sand, you know, if you will, retracing her father's footsteps. And even at that, later, my son, my middle son, Jonathan, was interested in this. So again, on another business trip, brought him along. And our objective was to retrace part of his footsteps as his unit went through France in World War II. And so we
Oh,
visited
wow.
these little villages, took pictures. They had memorials to his division, and we could come back and share that with the rest of the family. Um, so there is, a need to spark that interest, and then once the young people today, my grandchildren are in the same boat. They want to know, but they don't know that they want to know until they
Right.
start hearing.
Right. And I can really resonate with that in the regard of when my middle son graduated from Marine boot camp. Of course, they have family day. So
Right?
you get to go and then he shows us around and we get to see the yellow footprints and I had the urge to stand on them,
Yeah.
but in the same sense to me it was not my right. It was but just imagining the history of those who stood there on those yellow
Yeah.
footprints,
Yeah.
and it just so I completely understand that, and that feeling of just history
Yeah.
right there in your, right at your fingertips. So I appreciate that. So what have you been doing now? So you've gone, and you're the historian, is that correct? For the 307th Bombardment Group Association.
Yeah. That's another part of my journey here in retirement, huh? um, in addition to being my wife's 24/7 caregiver, um, I'm a volunteer historian for the 307th Bombardment Group Association. Now, they formed, I think, 20, maybe even 30 years ago to fellowship with and meet the needs of World War II veterans to preserve their memory. And not only that, they do a very interesting work that most reunion associations don't necessarily do. They will, if a family wants to find what happened to their loved one who was lost and maybe is still carried as unaccounted for, missing in action, that association has a World War II historian, James McCabe. He's awesome.
Yes.
They will go track down the records and find out what happened to that person on behalf of the family. And then they do even more. There are 5 or 6 families that are still searching for the bodies to recover the remains. And so the 307th will work with other groups that organize searches for missing aircraft and recovering bodies. They work in conjunction with the Department of Defense, who does this officially, to get access to the site, go find it, and search for the airplane or the actual body of the family of the loved one that's still unaccounted for. And the Pentagon collaborates with these folks. So the 307th Association does this. It's a tremendous all-volunteer organization that does this service as well. So I ran into them because I was searching for my uncle's history. My uncle was in the first B-29 shot down in the Korean War by a Russian MiG.
Oh, wow.
And so my mother, before she died, asked me to help her find more details about what happened to him. This is while I was in the Air Force, so I had some pull, right? And so I was able to get the Air Force to cough up some details and share those with my mother before she died. But then I became obsessed with finding out what happened to Uncle Junior.
Right.
And so I spent years in Air Force archives and the National Archives, searching all over the place. I ran into the 307 thinking maybe they would know something about it. And so I joined up with them, and they were just getting ready to move into the Korean War, in addition to their work on the members who were in World War II. So they were very, very helpful. They asked me to help them expand their outreach into the Korean War era, and been gladly doing that. So that's kind of how I fell in with this association and how I'm carrying forth this work. But I didn't become really passionate about it beyond my uncle's story until I realized that these veterans, they deserve our attention. They deserve our gratitude. They deserve our affections even. And we have an obligation, I think, as a country and as a generation, to preserve that before they go away. So that's just how I've been led to do this kind of work.
And I think that's amazing. And I want to thank you for your help in locating these individuals. Because if I recall, was it November, December, something like that, that they had found one?
The difficulty with the Korean War, of course, is that you can't get into North Korea to search.
Right. This one, I
difficulty-
think, would have been maybe from World War II. I can't
Yeah,
recall.
the Pentagon, continues to devote resources to looking for unaccounted fors, and occasionally they are able to bear the fruit. One of the things they're doing these days is using more advanced DNA techniques to identify remains that are collected and stored, particularly in Hawaii at the unknowns from the Pacific Wars that are buried there. And so when they get some DNA samples from wherever, they will try to narrow down which remains to look at to try to identify. And so every now and then they're successful in identifying, and then that brings such closure to the families, even to the 3rd and 4th generations who knew that World War II veteran only remotely. I had never realized how important that closure is for someone who's carried as missing in action or unaccounted for.
Right. And I think I do. I agree. I think it's really important for the family to be able to know and lay that family member to rest and feel like they have in fact, gotten the closure that they deserve. So again, I think that's huge, and thank you so much for getting involved in that. I know we did have as a guest the 307th uh, bombardment group on, and so it was really nice to hear the background and learn what exactly the group does, the
Yeah.
association does. And
Yeah, that was I watched that episode. That was James and Jim and Greta
yes,
Walsh.
yes,
Um, and again, they didn't fight in the World War II, but they had relatives who did, and that's what motivated them to do
yeah,
what they do. Um, and there's another phenomena that I've come to realize, and that is as each generation, dies off. I mean, the clean way to say that is the demographics shift, right? They get older and they
right,
die.
more
The
mature,
association, the associations and the organizations associated with them have less interest in membership, and so two things happen. One is they will just sort of uh, dissolve. They will in an orderly manner just sort of close up shop. Or in some cases, unfortunately, they start to compete for a diminishing number of members.
and
And that's a tragic, but it's something we need to recognize that's going on out there from time to time. And so I try to help avoid that in the case of the Korean War veterans, in particular, and the 307th in particular. Jim and Greta, this organization is awesome. They're not interested in competing, and they're not going to be satisfied with just closing up shop. They're going to continue to serve in this manner successive generations of members of the 307th. The 307th is still serving in the United States Air Force. They are at Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana. They're in the Air Force Reserve, but they're one of the three B-52 bomb wings. And so they've got their reservists mustered into active duty all the time. If you don't, if you just pay part of attention to the news, you got B-52s everywhere all the time.
you
So
do,
the
yeah, 100%.
is doing that. And the 307th is the unit that, there you go, that trains all of America's B-52 nuclear bombing crews. All the training devices for nuclear weapons employment is at Barksdale with the 307th, and they're responsible for training, providing that initial training on how to employ nuclear weapons. And so it's a very important unit. It's something else to go down to Shreveport, Barksdale, and visit with those folks.
Yeah, I'd love to do it. I think it would be an absolute experience that I would not forget to do. And I just think it's amazing how Jim had basically inherited all of
Yes.
that information. I
Yeah.
think is incredible, and
Yeah.
it's incredible that you as well continue to learn and about, in this instance, the Korean War now, and putting it to paper, right? And getting the stories of several that had served during
Yeah.
that time and over there, and
Yeah. Well, I'm
so it's
committed
not
to the
lost.
That's right. And I'm committed to the 307th that my next book is going to be their history, the 307th as a whole, in the whole Korean War for 3 years. And I've got most of the research done. And as soon as we get my gunner's book out there on the streets, I'm going to put my pen to paper and we'll get the 307th history done. And after that, I'm going to write a book about my uncle's experience.
Oh, I'm excited for all of those. That sounds great. And in response to talking about books, there's a
Yeah.
book I'm not familiar, and I can't quite read the title. Is that My Brave Old Army Team?
Oh,
Is that
that was another commercial book that I did while I was in the think tank world. That's called On Brave Old Army Team. That is
On Brave. Okay, I couldn't make out that first word.
that's the story of the West Point cheating scandal of 1951, when the entire football team was caught cheating and summarily dismissed from the academy. What an interesting story that turned out to be. And I won't go into that because we don't have time tonight but I did 2 commercial books while I was at the think tank. Thunder in the Desert, which was intended to be the first instant history of the Gulf War in 1991. And it was the first one out by about a week.
Oh, wow.
Of course, it has a lot of things that need to be corrected because it was an instant history. And sometimes when people ask me about the book, I say, well, look, there's 7 mistakes that I'm aware of. Go find them and come back to me. And then On Brave Old Army Team was a very controversial book because I laid much of the blame or the responsibility for the cheating scandal on the academy itself. And so, that just generated an awful lot of controversy. And I did not have access to all the records at the time. So I had to kind of fill in the blanks best I could. Anyway, I got those 2 books published, and then and they weren't bestsellers. You can still get them on Amazon, I think, for a nickel or $1, something like that, if you're interested. But then when I started doing government contract work and working on the air staff, that all had to stay in-house until I retired in January of 2023. And so I have no more clearances anymore. So I'm back out on the streets, armed and dangerous.
That's so funny. So, when do you anticipate having your book regarding the Korean War published?
Gunners, the men who manned the B-29 machine guns in the Korean War, will be released in June, just in
Okay.
time for the 75th anniversary of the outbreak of the Korean War. More importantly, the first B-29 combat mission in the Korean War was 48 hours after the war broke out.
Oh, wow.
They moved B-29s from its base in Guam up to Kadena on Okinawa, and the next day they went north and dropped bombs on the invading North Koreans. That was the 19th Bombardment Group. The 307th was stationed at MacDill Air Force Base, Tampa, Florida. They were alerted that day. And in less than 30 days, they moved to Kadena Air Force Base on Okinawa and conducted their first combat mission on August 8th. It's not a well-known story how quickly the bombers got into action and what they were doing.
Right.
You had B-29 bombers designed to fly at 30,000 feet and drop bombs precisely on strategic targets. On the 27th of June, you had them flying at treetop level, dropping bombs on North Korean troops. And so it's for those of you who are interested in military history and tactics and operations, it's a fascinating story. And I try to capture that in this book of the experiences of the gunners.
Yeah, I'm really excited about that. Now, and will that book be out on all?
Yeah, it'll be paper it'll be available through Amazon, and it'll be distributed to bookstores. I don't know yet what the publisher's distribution plan is, but another thing I've learned is that publishing books today is very different than it was 30 years ago. 30 years ago, you signed on with a publisher and they published it, right? Nowadays, you gotta have a publisher willing to work to get it out there. And I've got a great one that's going to do that, and a track record for doing it.
Excellent.
So you have to cooperate with them. You have to do a lot more of the work than I had to do before. But it'll be out in sometime late June, according to current plans. And it'll be available in bookstores. Just don't know which ones, but certainly on Amazon, either in paper or through Kindle, downloadable on Kindle.
Wonderful.
I don't know if we're going to get widespread hardcover distribution or audiobooks, but let's get it finished and get it out
Right.
there and work on
Exactly. One step at a time.
yeah.
So, my question to you would be for the person that is looking to join the military,
Uh-huh.
what words of wisdom do you have for somebody like that?
Go for it. Just go for it. You will read in Gunners about how 10 men in 10 very different ways found themselves into the military uh, during the Korean War. In fact, a couple of them were World War II veterans and either were recalled to active duty for the Korean War in the emergency or um, re-enlisted and went off to the Korean War. There's no set pattern. There's no um, uh, approved solution for getting into the military. There are tracks, um, and there are procedures, but if you feel motivated to get into the military, go for it. Go talk to a recruiter. Um, Talk to several recruiters. Don't accept the word of just one. Even talk to other recruiters of the same service because they all
Yeah.
have a lot of different options
Yeah.
um, that are available to them, and they meet their requirements at different rates. So you may be able to find one recruiter who is looking for supply soldiers, and the other one's looking for infantry. I mean, it's a very complicated world. So follow your motivation and don't quit.
Yes, excellent. Those are some great words for anybody looking to join the military. I have this sense that at this time numbers are improving for the recruiters. So it's really important, for for those individuals to make sure that they really write down the questions. They have, good support people and a plan of action, right? You can't just, like you said, go in and take everything at face value and say, okay, let me
Yeah,
sign. You got to
yeah,
ask some questions. You've got to know what questions to ask.
yeah.
Um, the case of my oldest Marine, he had been um, Army Reserve and deployed twice to Afghanistan. When he came back, he wanted to go full time infantry. And the recruiter at that time said they didn't have any openings
Right.
because they, just like you said, they have numbers. They've got to meet for different MOSs. And that was one that was he'd met. So he didn't need any more. And he was hoping that my son would choose a different MOS. So my son's like, well, fine. If you won't let me go infantry, I'm going to walk next door to the Marine Corps. And that's
Yeah.
exactly what he did. So, yeah. So now apparently there then became an opening for
Yeah.
infantry for the Army. But yes, that's exactly right. So, um, and the other thing I would add to what you said is if you're looking to do more than just infantry, they do the ASVAB, et cetera, and you can that they check that score. They see where you lie. And dependent upon what number you fall at will depend on what they believe you're qualified to do.
Right.
So, your basic, math and reading and English and science, whatever, those are all kind of subjects that you kind of have to have a little understanding. And I'm not talking, the high level AP stuff, but enough to, at least hit a mark that's going to be able to allow those doors to open for you for
Yeah.
those different MOSs.
Yeah, and you can practice and work in advance and try to increase your scores ahead of time. Same is true, frankly, with your medical records. If you think you may have a disqualifying condition, look for get your doctor to work on that so that you can overcome something that the military will accept as qualifying.
Yes. Yes, that's a really good point. And I do remember with my youngest, he'd broken his arm when he was little, both bones, and I had to get all of that for him and send that off. And it was like, oh gosh,
Yeah.
it was just trying to remember where were we, and just to get the information. But yeah, yeah. So, um, resources. I know we talked a little bit about the resources that you were provided when you were transitioning back to civilian life. But as of now, are you aware of resources for veterans in your area and other resources that might not be in your area that we could pass along?
That's a great question. I'm not. Uh, Obviously, I transitioned a long, long time ago, but uh, I know that the services, the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Space Force, they provide far more transition resources than what was
Amen.
available when I left. And of course, the Veterans Administration has a tremendous amount of available things available. I'm a member of DAV and American Legion and Korean War veterans, and all of those national organizations offer um, a lot of services that you can tap into. Um, Another resource I found very beneficial, not well known, is the state veterans organizations, state government um, uh, organizations for veterans. I live in Virginia. There is a Virginia Veterans Administration. In fact, I found those folks more responsive and smarter about what's available for me anyway as a disabled veteran. Um, and so don't neglect looking at into your state government departments of Veterans Affairs,
Yes, that's good news.
because they certainly were in my case.
Yeah. And my brother, also a veteran, he's in Nevada, and he said the same thing. And he actually listed several in Nevada for veterans.
Yeah.
And that's when I forget about those. So that's really good to help me remember as well. So Jason said that, of course, the 307th Bombardment Group is definitely an organization he can get behind. And then he was telling us that he had one
Wow.
grandpa in World War II, one in Korea, four uncles, and an aunt in Vietnam. And yes, a very long family history in the military. So his dad is one of 13.
Wow. Wow.
Or sorry, one of 12. One of 12. Um,
Well, Jason, just go to 307bg.org and that'll get you into the 307th Bombard. I think that's the website. Let me double check before I send you off on
a wild goose.
might be BGA, but I think it's just BG. It's not coming up instantly for me here. Oh, there it is. 307bg.org.
Not net.
Nope, it's 307bg.org.
Okay. I'm going to put that in the post as soon as my computer. There it is. Okay, so let's copy this.
And go to my YouTube channel. Give me some views on the history of the 307th Bombardment Group in the Korean War. It'd take you 3 hours to go through all 8 episodes, but there's a 3-minute trailer.
Okay, and what is your YouTube
My
channel?
YouTube channel is James Blackwell 4555. And the first thing that
James
should
Blackwell 4555?
yes. And what should pop up is the playlist for the 307th history. First episode is the trailer.
Okay. Let's see. Let's see if I can get that to pull up. Um, James Blackwell 4555. Ah, there's a different James Blackwell.
Oh yeah, that's the guy that's selling marketing stuff.
Yeah, as I say, he doesn't look like you. Um, that's pretty funny. And he's in there a lot. It's like, oh my gosh.
Oh yeah, I got to get more views to get him out of the way.
Okay. And is it, let's try it maybe at James?
Oh, it's at James Blackwell 4555. I'm sorry.
That's
Inside
okay.
YouTube. Yeah.
Okay, let's try that. There you are. Okay. I'm subscribing now.
Oh, awesome. Number
So
30.
woohoo. I'm number 30. Jason, I know if he hasn't already, he will be subscribing too. So
Awesome.
let me go ahead and just share that. So for anybody who, well, I'm on my conversations with a vet.
Yeah, no, that's
But
okay. Like
yeah.
I said,
So,
the 3 minute trailer is, there's no words. It's just videos that I've collected and set to some music that I pirated.
oh, that's funny. Okay, so for anybody interested, there it is. I put it out there
Great.
again. So that is
Awesome.
YouTube
Thank you,
at
Carol.
James Blackwell 4555. So be sure to go out and subscribe to his channel. I have a feeling you're going to be you're going to post more stuff. So
Oh
we
yeah.
don't want to miss any of that, as well as when his newest book comes out in June. We want to be aware.
Yeah,
So
and the book is you'll be able to get snippets from the book at my website, jamesblackwellauthor.com.
excellent. Let me put that out there also.
And that one won't pop up with that competitor from sales.
Is it is it www or is it HTTPS or just HTTP? Do you know?
It is HTTPS www.jamesblackwellauthor.com.
Excellent. All right, so that should work, I think. If anybody is looking for that, does
There
that
you
look
go.
right?
That's it.
Excellent. So, all right. Do you have anything to close out today with?
No, just that I really appreciate this opportunity, Carolee, and really grateful for what you do. And we're going to try to expand your reach. And the Lord has called me to this in retirement. I had no idea when I retired in January that my wife would be stricken with these severe medical conditions the next month. But it turns out it's made me a better writer because it's slowed me down. And I have less chance to make mistakes, more opportunity to have other people take a look at this stuff. But more importantly, it's giving me a sense of mission. It's given me the opportunity to meet with Korean War veterans and really better understand why what things like things that you and I and others do
Right.
can make a difference. And that's my hope. That's my calling these days.
Well, it's a wonderful calling, and thank you, for your service, thank you for your sacrifice and your continued service. And
Thank
for
you for the
again,
opportunity to be on
anybody
camera.
interested, this is going to be one of the giveaways when we do hit our 500 marks. So, as far as our subscribers, so be sure you will have to be present to win, and in the chat so that I know you're there and we can add your name to the wheel, and we'll spin until all of everything is been given away. But if you're interested in a copy of this book prior to the giveaway, if you can't wait to get a copy, then you can go out to Amazon. You can go out to pretty much where any book is sold and get a copy for yourself. So again, that's Thunder in the Desert, the strategy and tactics of the Persian Gulf War. And that is by James Blackwell. So again, thank you very much for your donation with that. So we'll be sure to get that not shared, and I am really excited to read it as well. So
Awesome. Thank you.
just knowing, it's history for me. I just distinctly remember sitting on the floor, and I was wrapping presents, and
Yeah.
the news hit, breaking news.
Yeah.
Here we are. It was like, whoa. So, yeah, and that for us, for my generation was the first, because most of it, I mean, Vietnam for me was either, almost over. So there wasn't a whole lot of news with that, right? So because it was just at that real tail end, not a lot going on.
Yeah.
As you said, not a lot of soldiers were being sent over there. So, they're trying to get things kind of wrapped up. So, and then it was just pretty much peace, if you will, for such a while. So yeah, so when that happens, I recall that distinctly. So I'm really excited to get into the book and kind of get a little inside information. So if you want to hold tight for me, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up. But I want to thank everybody for coming on today in the chats, being with us here in the conversations, especially James. Thank you for a wonderful conversation. And for anyone who's watching this in the reruns, make sure, if you can, please, please, please give me a thumbs up, put a comment after the show, share, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so that you don't miss any content. But most importantly, share it with your veteran friends and family. So again, James, thank you very much. Thank you, everybody in the chats. I am super excited again to be doing this. And please be sure to join me again next Sunday, 6 p.m. Central Time, for another wonderful guest. So everybody have a great week coming up.
Thank you, Carolee.
Thank you.